The next morning at 5 a.m. I reported for duty. The staff there, all inmates who had gone through the same hardships as me, welcomed me with brotherly love. The doctor came and told me that my job was to wash the doctor's coats. Obviously, this situation was a blessing compared to what the women that came with me were assigned to do. Those who were in the death barracks lay there with no one coming to give them anything. I don't mean food, because they couldn't eat, but at least a glass of water. They stayed until they died, and at night they were taken out of the camp and thrown into a long and deep pit. They were covered with a little earth so that the next night they wouldn't have to work too hard to move the earth to put in others who were next in line. Many died, 30, 40 people a day. People from the villages neighboring the camp said that their dogs often brought a human leg or hand back to the village. Those who were housed in the barracks for the living had to start working. The young women spun wool for socks and gloves. The quota was 1 kilogram per day. The old and sick women made socks and gloves with a wooden hook. They had to make 4 pairs of gloves or socks per day. I didn't have any quota, but I was too weak to work anyway. When I looked in the mirror after a year and 4 months, I was horrified. My face was bruised and wrinkled like a baked apple, and I had a strange look in my eyes. My job was to fill a 20-bucket boiler with water, which I had to carry from a well about 300 meters away from the laundry, to chop wood to heat the water, and then to wash and iron about 15 coats a day. I used all my strength to do my duty, but it was beyond my capacity. But wherever there is a will, there is a way. All the men and women who worked there had gone through the same period I was in, between life and death. Having recovered, they came to my aid, carrying water, chopping wood, while the women washed, scrubbed, and wrung out the coats. The food was better than in prison. In the morning, 2 bowls of clear soup with a potato. At noon, Russian soup was the first course, and the second was a ladle of kasha made of wheat, and the next day a ladle of peas. In the evening, a soup like in the morning. To tell the truth, the food at noon had a tiny drop of fatness. I received 500 grams of bread per day. In the first few days, I couldn't eat anything, but those around me forced me to eat. After about 2 weeks, I recovered my appetite to such a degree that I cried from hunger. Then my colleagues would offer a spoonful from their meager portions. More they couldn't, being hungry themselves. Slowly, I adapted to this new life, regained my strength, and did all the work myself in the most diligent manner. The company I had was also very comforting. Everyone supported me. First, they were compassionate, then they became good friends. The doctor was the head of the hospital. She came to see me every day, encouraging me that I would recover, and often, when no one was looking, she would slip something into my pocket, a meatball, a piece of bread with butter. All of this gave me the strength to endure all difficulties. One evening, a nurse came to my bedside and said, "Go to room 5. There's a Romanian who wants to see you." I rushed down the hallway. There, in a hospital bed, lay an elderly man, perhaps 60 or 65, his face gentle and spiritual. I approached him and asked if he had sent for me. In Romanian he replied, "Yes, I heard you were Romanian." I introduced myself and he said, I am Catholic Bishop Ioan Hondru of Ismail. I kissed his hand, to the astonishment of the Russians who were with him in the room. We talked for almost an hour. I did most of the talking, as it was very difficult for him to speak. He asked me to visit him every day, even if it was just for 5 minutes. And so I did. Whenever I had time, I would run to see him, bringing him great pleasure and joy, but only in the evenings, as I was very busy during the day. He was in the last days of his life. He couldn't eat anything, and his roommates, who were younger, took advantage of this. His portion was more substantial: a glass of milk, 10 grams of butter, a meatball or a piece of meat a day. They even fought over his food, so he asked the nurse who was serving the food to not bring his lunch to the ward, but to give it to me. I refused and told him I couldn't do something so cruel, to take food from the sick, but he begged me with tears in his eyes, saying that he couldn't eat, and rather than let the bandits have it, you should eat it. Our friendship lasted 2 weeks. One morning the same nurse summoned me urgently. He was dying, yet he was very conscious, very calm, and very happy. I admired him on his deathbed. After much suffering, he was dying with a strong faith, thanking God for everything, and encouraging me to bear all difficulties with patience and gratitude. He said, "Remember me in your prayers." As I kissed his hand, he closed his eyes. They buried him like they did to the rest. For many years after his passing, I felt a deep emptiness. He had brought me great spiritual comfort. He was very wise and had a strong faith. He strengthened me greatly for the challenges of life. 3 months passed as I worked as a laundress. My body and soul began to heal. Despair faded, and I lived with the hope that God would see me through these 8 years and allow me to return home. I was not allowed to correspond with anyone, so I knew nothing about anyone, not even my husband. I didn't know if he was also in Siberia. One day the head doctor called me and said, "After much insistence, I managed to get a separate kitchen for the hospital. I've been watching you for these 3 months, and I'm convinced that you are diligent and honest. Starting tomorrow, you'll take the position of kitchen manager." She gave me instructions on how to manage it, gave me records of food received and issued, and kissed me, wishing me success. Of course, this change in my situation was advantageous for several reasons. First, it showed her trust in my integrity. Second, I didn't have to do the actual work, only supervise, keep the accounts, tasks far more suitable than laundry work. The entire food supply was now under my care. I could eat whatever I wanted and as much as I wanted. However, on the first day when I went to get the food from the camp's storage, I encountered a great difficulty. When I opened the food register and tried to make a note, I realized with dismay that I no longer knew how to write. I had forgotten how to write and calculate. I refrained from asking the warehouse manager and instead asked a cook who had come with me to write on my behalf, as it was a new task for me and I didn't know how. After leaving all the provisions in the kitchen, I ran desperately to the head doctor's office and, bursting in tears, I told her I had lost my mind. Alarmed, she asked about the cause of my distress, and I told her I couldn't write or calculate any more. She kissed me and said, "Calm down. It's not madness. It's called pellagra. Your brain has dried up from hunger, and you can't write any more. We've all been through it. That's what happened to me too. And now you see I can write. You need to eat well. Now you have plenty of food, and you'll recover. I'll tell a cook to do the accounting, and you'll manage the supplies." I cried out of pain and shame. At the same time, I was afraid of losing such a favorable position. Indeed, I started eating more, and to my delight, within 2 months, my memory had fully returned, and I became normal again. The days passed very quickly, being occupied all day with the kitchen, and in the evenings with accounting. I would get up at 4 a.m. and continued until midnight. In this camp, prisoners were detained until they were deemed fit for work. Once they recovered, they were transferred to forced labor camps. No one was allowed to stay there for more than a year. Every 3 months, a commission of doctors and security guards would come and selected the strongest for transfer to labor camps. When such commissions arrived, my doctor knew in advance and would hide me in her quarters until the inspection was over. Thus, instead of the mandated 1-year term, I remained in that camp for 2. I made a full recovery, gaining 45 kilograms. I had adapted to the conditions and felt very well. I could have stayed much longer if a misfortune hadn't befallen me. The camp was overseen by a security lieutenant, assisted by a sub-lieutenant. Representing the party was a 22-year-old female member of the Communist Union of Youth. Prisoners made up the remaining supervisors. The commander, his assistant, and a female party member had the authority to conduct inspections throughout the camp, particularly in the hospital kitchen, which was managed by the imprisoned doctor. These inspections often provided opportunities for them to sneak some of the food, which was tastier than the food cooked in the kitchen camp. The 2 male supervisors came very rarely, and, entering the kitchen, checked that it was clean. Immaculate cleanliness was required. They would taste the food and leave. But the communist comrade, Valentina Mahova, developed a taste for the food, and during inspections would sit at the table daily, which was forbidden. Eventually, her audacity grew, and she started taking home cream, butter, and other foods she liked. I was in charge, and I had the authority to give her all these. Because of her greed, the portions of the sick patients, which were already quite small, 10 grams of butter, 50 grams of meat per day, were getting even smaller. I mentioned it to her, but she always shut me down, saying she was the boss and free to do as she pleased, and that I was an enemy of the people and should mind my own business. I felt a pang of guilt for not acting honestly, so I asked the head of the hospital to advise me how to proceed. The doctor was furious, and whenever the Communist Party representative came for something, the doctor came too. She found her with a package in her hand, took the package, and scolded me severely in front of her, but it was just for show. Then she told the party representative that she would report her to the headquarters. From that moment on, the party representative tried to get me removed from my position. She told everyone at the top, but no one took her word for it, knowing me to be honest and diligent in my work. But her time had come. When the commission from Moscow arrived to select those who were to be sent to another camp, she put me first on the list. They examined me, saw that I was healthy, and the next day, along with about 300 men and women, I was sent to the Orlovo-Rozovo camp, also in the Kemerovo region. A Russian proverb says, "When you see so many unfortunate people around you like yourself, you somehow don't feel your own misfortune." I wanted to leave a thank you note for my kind guardian, the doctor, because she was the one who brought me back to life. But they had sent her with a delegation to another camp, so that she could no longer hide me.